So welcome to the next lecture of More Nevuchim. Thank you for joining. We are up to chapter number 50, which in the Pines edition is page 111. And we're going to see there's some interesting arguments as to how to translate some of Rambam's original Arabic terms. So I'll point that out as we read it. But if we start from chapter 50, we say, no, you have it. Thou who studiest this, my treatise. And Rambam is going to start by explaining to us what the difference is between knowing something and perceiving it or figuring it out or so on. So this term here that Pines translates as belief is an argument among the translators of Rambam. And Rav Kapach, whose Hebrew edition is the one that I'm using, and I really like, he disagrees with translating this Arabic term, which I can't pronounce, but written in Judeo-Arabic sounds something like atikad, something like that. So they argue over how to translate that Judeo-Arabic word. And so he translates it, the Pines, as belief, which Hebrew version would be emuna, like belief. And Kapach says that emuna connotes something which is a belief of someone. That's not something that somebody thinks or sees, or a way of looking at things that he believes by tradition, based on what he or she was taught or knows. And therefore, and he says, and as we study this chapter, we'll see that Rav Kapach thinks it's not an appropriate translation. He translates it as deya in Hebrew, which is knowledge, knowing something. And I completely agree with Rav Kapach. So when you see the word belief in the Pines English, you're going to hear me use the word, either the Hebrew word deya or the English word a knowledge, something that we know. So you should know that what someone says, belief is not the notion that is uttered, what somebody states, because people say a lot of things, right? But it's the notion that is represented in the soul. And it's interesting, Rambam does use the term soul here, and he's identifying our intellectual processes, what we think and what we know in our minds, as being in our soul, which is important to recognize that we place the soul in what nowadays we would call in our brain, but Rambam would be in our inner bodies. So is the notion that is represented in the soul when it has been averred of it, that it is in fact just as it has been represented. In other words, that's a fancy medieval way of saying, and those that recently joined, if you have a medieval philosopher cap in your closet, take it out and put it on your head now, because that's the way Rambam is going to be talking now. And that is, in other words, we see something, right? Whatever it is that we see, and then we make assumptions, and we derive certain things out of what we see. We assess it in a certain way, and then when we somehow prove it to ourselves, either, I don't know, by doing experiments, or simply, some people have, higher standards of proof than others, but to some, we prove it to ourselves, and then in our mind we believe it, and then we know it, right? And I chose the word know it for a reason. So we look outside, we see it's raining, right? We know that we put our hand out the window, it's wet, so we now know that it's raining outside, right? As opposed to some other kind of weather pattern. So if you belong to those who are satisfied with expressing in speech the opinions that are correct, or that you deem to be correct, without representing them to yourself and believing them, and still less without seeking certain knowledge regarding them, you take a very easy road. Now, I want to look at the Hebrew does a better job translating this Kapach's Hebrew, because he says, if you are some people that it is enough for them, right? I'm translating the Hebrew into my own modern English, of various thoughts, it is simple enough for them to simply say, you know what, I learned in school that God is one. So they state God is one, all right? I learned in school, everyone tells me that this and this and this is what's happening. And that's easy for them. And they think these are the proper things, these are the proper ideas. So they state them without actually trying to understand and know them, right? Then you're choosing an easy path, right? It's an easy path to choose what Jeff was saying before about the person who says, I don't need to study the guide for the perplexed. I'm not perplexed, right? Because I know it. Everyone says it. I know it. I learned it in school. This is the way it is, without going through the process of actually really proving it to yourself until you really know it. That, the Rambam says, you take a very easy road. In accordance with this, you will find many stupid people holding to beliefs to which, in their representation, they do not attach any meaning whatsoever. If you take this path, and this is why it's so crucial, it may be true what you're stating, but it has no meaning to you. If you didn't go through the process to truly prove it to yourself and internalize it, it has no meaning. It's just, it's just parroting what the other guy said. It's just parroting what they taught you in school. It's just parroting what you heard the rabbi say in the sermon, right? If, however, you belong to those whose aspirations are directed toward ascending to that high rank, which is the rank of speculation, right? In other words, ma'alat ha'iyun is what he chooses in the Hebrew. It's better than speculation, because speculation, iyun meaning analysis, right? Is the way the Kapach translates the original Arabic. So if you're the kind of person who it rises in your heart that desire to really know something and to actually analyze it and think about it and learn about it and actually know it, right? Until you get to the point, right? And to gaining certain knowledge with regard to God's being one by virtue of a true oneness, so that no composition whatever is to be found. In other words, so that you're going to know this ultimate truth, the truth of the oneness of God, right? And no possibility of division in any way whatsoever. You can't divide up God into parts or pieces or ways he is, or ways you see him, or ways and so on. Then you must know that he, may he be exalted, has in no way and in no mode any essential attribute. That we can't even say God has certain attributes. God has certain things about him. Like, in other words, which would tend to say sometimes he acts like this, sometimes he acts like that. That in and of itself is starting to make these divisions. And that just as it is impossible that he should be a body, and just that we've very much explained that God has no physical characteristics, it is also impossible that he should possess an essential attribute, that it's also impossible to say that God has certain attributes. So if you belong to that kind of person that really wants to know this, not just parrot it and say God is one, but really wants to understand it. And Rambam is actually starting a series of chapters here, which leads to one of his greatest achievements, which is the idea of negative attributes, which has resounded throughout all theologians since the Rambam, right? Which is more or less an original idea of the Rambam. He's introducing that. We're not going to get to negative attributes today, but he's introducing that idea. He's going to tell us that I want to bring you through the process of really knowing it. Okay. So if, however, and if you're one of those people that really, really wants to know it inside and not just parrot things and not take the easy path, if, however, someone believes that he is one, but okay. So that, in other words, then come with me on this trip. If, however, Rambam was, as I mentioned a couple times, it came up, but he had a lot of serious problems with Christianity. And one of his big problems is the idea of the Trinity. And he's about to attack that idea right now. So he says, if, however, someone believes that he is one, but possesses a certain number of essential attributes. He says, God is one, but sometimes he appears like this, sometimes he appears like that. In other words, he has different attributes. You can say God is, you can describe him in a certain way. Then he says in his words, then all that person is doing is stating in his language that he is one, but believes him in his thought to be many. But in his brain, what he's thinking is that there's a lot of different gods, because sometimes I experience God like this, sometimes I see God like that, sometimes I feel God like this, right? Sometimes God manifests this way, sometimes that way. So the idea of oneness is only in his speech, but not in his heart, not in his soul. So this resembles what the Christians say, namely that he is one, but also three, and that the three are one. I'm not here to lecture on Christian theology. I don't know Christian theology, but Rambam is here criticizing the idea that God could be one, but it could also be three, one. It doesn't make sense. Rambam can't accept that, right? Once you describe attributes, you're already off the path. We have to stick to a pure oneness. Similar to this is the assertion of him who says that he is one. And similar, just take the next step. So now you have the step of the person who says, yeah, God is one, but he also has attributes. However, those attributes, he and his attributes are one, right? So this person is kind of getting a little closer to the truth, but not quite there yet, right? So he denies at the same time his being corporeal. Okay, God has no body, I got that. And believes in his absolute simplicity, that God is perfect. Simplicity here is not meant in a critical way to lower something. It's meant to mean it's absolute perfection, right? As if what we aimed at and investigated were what we should say and not what we should believe. So this person has kind of gotten confused. Like he wants to say that God is one. He wants to make it simple. He gets it. He's saying the right words, but he's still thinking about attributes. So he's still lost. He's still out, right? So then he goes on to explain a little bit. And here we start to see the seeds of actually how the religious philosophers, and not just the Jewish ones like Maimonides, but other religious philosophers really gave birth to what's called science. A lot of people when they talk about the history of science, talk about how if not for the religious thinkers, there wouldn't have been a basis for us to think about a scientific method. And Rambam, what he's going to say now is going to sound so much like that it's just fascinating. It says, for there is no belief except after a representation. You can't believe something until you see it, meaning you can't believe it until you prove it. In the Hebrew translation, it's a better one at that. Right, until you achieve knowledge of something. You have to prove it. You have to go through the process of proving something externally in order to actually believe it. Belief is the operation. And remember, I slipped here. The Hebrew translate, it's not belief. Belief in English gives us the sense that it's something that we believe because we're told to believe it. But the actual better word is knowledge. There is no knowledge. There is no idea that a person can attain inside without having a representation. But knowledge is the affirmation that what has been represented is outside the mind, just as it has been represented in the mind, meaning the concepts, the rules. Nowadays, we would call them sometimes scientific rules and laws, right? That we conceive of and we understand and we learn, and then we look outside into the evidence and we see that those rules and laws work. That is the purity of an idea. And that's the only thing that Rambam will accept. So if you're going to talk the talk, but deep inside you're thinking things of God going in all different kinds of places and ways, then you're not all there yet. All you know is how to talk the talk about God being one, but you don't really have it deep inside. So if together with this knowledge, remember I'm using the word knowledge instead of belief, one realizes that a knowledge different from it is in no way possible, and that no starting point can be found in the mind for a rejection of this knowledge, or for the supposition that a different knowledge is possible, then there is certainty. So when you prove something through logic, through proof, through analysis, and then you see that the reality conforms to your proof, and no other explanation is viable, every other explanation doesn't work, that's when you have certainty. That's when you got it. That's when you know it. Now, it's not always that you get there, but that's where we're trying to get to the point of certainty, where you know it so clearly, not only in your speech, not only are you saying the right words, but you actually have it in your heart, in your soul, as the Rambam said. When you shall have cast off desires and habits, and this is really crucial, in order to get there, right? In order to get there, you have to get rid of all of your personal, your personal nigiot. I'm trying to get the English word. All of your personal, tendencies and desires, etc. I mean, you're gonna start off. If you start off having having an agenda. That's a good way of saying it. You need to prove something, and you believe something and you want to prove yourself right. If you start off having a selfish desire, you're never going to get to the truth. You have to cast that away, and your only aim has to be the truth. So when you have to cast off all of your desires and habits, then, right, shall have been endowed with understanding and shall reflect on what I shall say in the following chapters. And you'll think about what I'm going to describe to you. And he's going to take us through the process. Today, we're going to get the introduction of the process. And then tomorrow, and our next lecture, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of how he goes through the negative attributes in order to bring us closer and closer and closer to this level of understanding. And we're going to go through this together. So then, which shall treat of the negation of attributes. It's the Rambam. It's a mental exercise, which is known in English as negative attributes. Then you shall necessarily achieve certain knowledge of it. So you have to get rid of all of your personal objectives. Your objective should only be the truth. You should have, that you should make it. You should not be lazy and take the easy path and just spout the truth because that's what you're told you're supposed to say. But you actually want to go through the process of learning it. Then you'll get there. Then you shall be one of those who represent to themselves the unity of the name, and not one of those who merely proclaim it with their mouth without representing to themselves that it has a meaning. So if you want to be a member of that club, then stick with this lecture. Okay. So and that's a very lofty club, and hopefully all of us will get there together. Now, with regard to men of this category, in other words, who were those people that just say things but don't get it, and Jeff, it's for those that heard before the class, Jeff mentioned a rabbi, I think you quoted him before, about a rabbi who said, oh, I don't need to study that because I'm not perplexed, I know it. That's exactly what the Rambam is attacking here. He's attacking exactly that attitude. The person who says, now I want you to know that this is very clearly Rambam's view and understanding. There's a very strong philosophical school of thought within the legitimate framework of Judaism that believes in simple faith, that believes that a better faith is a faith that believes because we believe, because that's the way it is. And I'm not here to argue which one is right or wrong, but this is a class about Maimonides, so we're learning Maimonides' approach. Maimonides would say, and he's about to bring verses to back himself up, that someone who chooses that approach he didn't say he's bad, he just said he's taking the easy road, right? Like the Rambam said, that guy's taking the easy road. He's going to parrot the right words, but he's never really going to get to the level that I want to get you to if you hang on and study with us together.
Well, so, stupid, he calls it stupid, the translation here.
He does. He does say the word stupid. Let me see what the Hebrew said. Yeah, the Hebrew said, he says pita'im, which is fools. But what I mean by he didn't criticize me, he didn't call them heretics, he didn't call them bad people, he just called them dumb people. Like, and why are they dumb? Because they're not going through this intellectual exercise, which is so valuable to the Rambam. It's so much about what the Rambam stands for. So with regard to men of this category, and he brings a verse, those that just simply talk is the verse from Jeremiah where he criticizes the people and says, Jeremiah is talking to God. He says, God, you are very close to them in their mouths. They talk about God all the time. But God, you're not inside their, kilyosem literally means inside their kidneys, but it means you're not in their kishkis, you're not in their body, you're not in their souls, right? The people can walk around talking God this, God that, but in their souls, you're just not there, right? And that's what the Rambam is saying. That's what those people that just speak the speech, but don't have it. But rather, don't take that path. But men ought rather belong to the category of those who represent the truth to themselves. And this translation represent is not so good. The Hebrew says it better. That Kapach translates it better. Those that prove it to themselves. Maskile ha'emes. Maskile means maskil is a person that achieves the knowledge, right? And understand it, even if they do not utter it. And it's the opposite. The real person is the one who has the knowledge in his heart, but doesn't bother saying it. There's no need to walk around yapping about how religious you are. That doesn't accomplish nothing. Such as the famous verse in Psalms, which it says, in Hebrew it says, Imru bilavavchem, speak in your hearts al mishkavchem, when you're upon your couches, v'domu sela, and just be quiet. Just be silent. In other words, a true religious person that feels it in his heart doesn't need to go around talking about how he knows the truth, how he understands the concepts of God. It's the opposite of the guy that talks and talks and talks, but doesn't really know inside what he's talking about. So, so the Rambam introduces us to the fact that he's about to lead us on an intellectual odyssey of proving of the oneness of God and helping us understand what it means. And while it's has a lot of it's philosophical and logic, but it's going to have a very it's emotional too. You feel it as we go through this odyssey. But before we do it, this is the end of a chapter. I'll stop the floor and ask for comments, questions, etc. Nobody wants to say anything. I'll go on. Any questions? I think everyone's just excited to get to the next chapter. All right. So here we go. Okay. So now.
Sorry, just one comment.
Yes.
This isn't the only area that the Maimonides tells us to forget everything that we learned. Like, you know, in the law of war, he says that he must forget about his family and his friends and his townsmen.
Mm-hmm.
So like he masters the idea of knowledge in such a way, like in a positive way, but like I think because he was so had so much power over his own knowledge, he wants to instill in us the same kind of
the same kind. The power over his own knowledge. You know, it's the force of his mind, and he wants us to have that same force. Thank you. So let's do to chapter 50. If there's anyone else,
Can I ask this one question?
Yes, please.
On this, I'm thinking of what we all say a million times or 3 times. You know, Hashem Echad.
Right.
How many Jews really are pausing to think, what does that really mean? Which is sort of, and is it necessary? I mean, you have the mitzvot, you have the do's and the don'ts. Why is it so essential to truly understand what it means? If the directive, I'm thinking of Ecclesiastes, you know, when everything is said and done, he closes it with all these.
So remember, it was a couple chapters back where Rambam said that for the simple folk, right, it's okay for them as long as they get certain basics, right? If you're not educated enough, you're not smart enough, and all you know is that God is not corporeal and God is one, and so on, then that's fine, right? In this case, he said, you know, if you want to be one of those stupid, I guess he figures if you got to chapter 50 by now, then you're probably not one of those people. You know, so by now you're probably one of those guys that really is going to get through it. But you're right. No, Rambam doesn't. He never calls those people bad people, right? He just considers them the riffraff, the common folk.
Well, he calls them fools.
Well, here he does, yes. But I think it's more in the context of if that's how you choose to be, fine, be a fool. But many people never make that choice. Many people are simply not, either they don't have the educational background or they don't have the intellectual capacity to go farther than that. And here, you know, yeah, I don't get the overall sense from the book that he considers people that aren't smart enough to go through this to be bad in any way. They're just never achieved this level of holiness, this level of intellectual achievement that he wants to help us get to. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
No.
except I'm just thinking of, you know, you are, you know, God is holy, you should be holy. I'm thinking of
He's gonna
holiness and intellectual prowess is something I have difficulty.
But when he gets to negative attributes, he's gonna have to deal with the fact that the Torah describes God with attributes, right? The most famous are the 13 attributes of mercy, right? So Rambam, he was educated. He knew that verse. So but we'll deal with that.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So there are many things in existence. So we're hitting chapter 51. I hope I can get through the chapter now. But here goes. That are clear and manifest. I'm going to tell you as a philosopher, and we're going to see this now, Rambam did not really like philosophers who made up philosophies or who developed philosophies that in clever ways denied that which we know to be real. So I'll give you an example. The whole idea, like we say from, I don't know, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. So as people like to kind of play these games, well, what if everything I'm seeing is just imaginary, right? What if, this table that I'm sitting at is not really a table. I'm just feeling it because my brain is playing tricks on me and making me think I'm feeling it, et cetera, et cetera. What if you are not, all the people listening to this lecture on Zoom are not, people that play like philosophical games like that. Rambam didn't really like that. He says, and he's about to go into this in detail, but just, when people try to play philosophical games to say that which is real and that which we see and that which we know to be true is not really true, he doesn't buy those kinds of philosophies. He thinks they're just playing games. So, and we also have to remember that the Rambam was an Aristotelian. So in his mind, what Aristotle said was the be all and end all of science of his era, and we touched on this a little bit, what Rambam would have said had he lived in our century. Of course, that's a game we can all play, but no one knows, right? But I assume, and if I'll argue that he would have advanced with science, just like science advanced long past Aristotle. But those are subjects, but we can talk about. But here he's going to say there are many things in existence that are clear and manifest, that are just obvious, primary intelligibles, right? Muskalim rishonim in Hebrew translation, muchashim. We can sense them, we could feel them. These are primary intelligibles that we all know, that none of us are going to argue about. They're perceived by the senses. And in addition, the things that come near to these in respect to their clarity. Some things might not be primary intelligibles, but they're close. They're really close. Like we're very convinced that these things are real. If man has been left as he naturally is, he would not have needed a proof of them. For instance, for the existence of motion. Now, this goes back to an old Greek argument as to whether motion is real. Because if one wants to play mental tricks, one can develop a whole system in which the motion that we're visualizing, that we're seeing, isn't really motion. It's all because it's all relative. It depends on who's moving, right? Is the sun going around the earth, or is it going on? It's in other words, you can play all kinds of mental gymnastics, right, to say that we're really not moving, right? So, or for the existence of man's ability to act. And here I'm specifically talking about, do we have any choice as to what we do, right? So those that would argue against free will, and nowadays it's be a much more sophisticated argument. You can argue through evolutionary mechanisms, through biochemical mechanisms, and all kinds of physiologic mechanisms that none of us really have any choices in the matter. We're pre-programmed to just walk through our lives and do everything it is that we do all the time because of all these other influences, and we don't have any control over our actions, right? So, so the existence of man's ability to act. So people. But you and I know, Rambam says, that people do have a choice, right? But you can make up all kinds of mental arguments to say that people don't, right? This isn't the last we're going to hear of Rambam and free choice, but he's introducing a list of ideas. So it's something to start, getting our brains working here. The manifestations of generation and corruption, the idea that, which is similar to the modern idea that, energy can't be consumed, it's just changed from one form to another. So generation and corruption is the old Greek philosophical idea that everything, that all matter, it grows into one form, and then that form goes, and then it goes to another form, and so on. It gets ruined and it dies, and then it comes back as a different form, and so on. Or the natures of the things that are apparent to the senses, things that were obvious the way we sense them. So like the hotness of fire, the coldness of water, and many other things of this kind. So these are things that are obvious to us. We know that we put our hand to fire, it's hot. We put our hand in ice, it's cold, right? Yet, since strange opinions have arisen, but people over time have come up with all of these philosophical tricks and games to try to convince us that this stuff isn't real. And Rambam says that all these people arose either to people who just made mistakes, they're just making mistakes, or to people who acted with some end in view. They had a purpose in mind when they told us this. Like those of us that tell us that people have no free choice may have an end in mind. And you can imagine what that end in mind will be, to absolve themselves of responsibility for the actions that they do, right? If I'm not in control of what I do, then I could do whatever I want, then can't blame me, right? So that professing such an opinion, they ran, but when they keep making, but they make these claims, but then the evidence, the obvious evidence is against them. So it ran counter to the nature of existence, and it denied a sensibly perceived thing, right? Or they wish to suggest to the estimated faculty the existence of a non-existent thing. They start imagining things that exist, forces of nature and things that exist that really don't exist, right? So therefore, the men of science, and here he's specifically referring to Aristotle and his school, have had to resort to proving those manifest things. They've had to go and say that, no, you're wrong. There is such a thing as motion. And Aristotle, and we're not studying Aristotle now, but here the Kapach tells you where it is in his Aristotle's book of physics, book 6, chapters 2 and chapter 9. Well, you can look it up in Aristotle if you want to read it. But he goes to prove that these people are wrong, that our emotions are real, our choices are real, etc. Thus, we find that Aristotle establishes the fact of motion as it had been denied, and he demonstrates the non-existence of atoms. This is not the atoms that you and I think about, what we learned in our chemistry class, but this is the atoms. There was an old debate among the Greek philosophers as to, there was those that proposed an atomic theory, and they said that everything is made up of tiny little particles. Aristotle argued on that. Part of the proof is the famous idea, if everything's made of tiny particles, what happens when you get to the tiniest one? You cut it in half, right? And then you cut that in half. It doesn't make sense, right? So it's not time and place to argue this, but just to know that Aristotle disproved that theory of atoms. So in Maimonides' mind, Aristotle had to go and prove to us that which was obvious by having to disprove this crazy theory of atoms, as their existence had been asserted, because somebody came up and decided that there was such a thing as atoms. But now here's the point. Why am I saying all this? So to this category, the stuff that's obvious, right, belongs the denial of essential attributes to God, right? It should have been obvious to all of us as human beings that God doesn't have essential attributes. Now, what does it mean by essential attributes? Attributes is attributing a certain characteristic to something, right? So if you look at the table in front of you, if it's brown, right, that's a characteristic of the table. If you say it's hard, that's a characteristic of the table. Now, if you want to describe God in any way at all, then you're giving him attributes, right? And it would have been obvious to us, if not for all the corruptions of our brain, that it should be obvious that we cannot actually give God any attributes. We can't describe him in any way. Because, well, just for a head start, because that would take away from his perfect oneness, right? So for that denial is a primary intelligible. It's an obvious fact. It's just obvious. Inasmuch as an attribute is not the essence of a thing, right? And by the which is I'm sorry, I got myself lost. For that denial is a primary intelligible, right? It's just a basic fact. Inasmuch as an attribute is not the essence of the thing of which is predicated, right? Because once you give something an attribute, then that's no longer the essence of the thing itself. It's a quality that the thing has, but it's on a certain level, it's separate from the thing itself. But it is a certain mode of the essence, and hence it is an accident. An accident, I don't like the English term accident, the way it's used in the Pines. Maybe, I think it's like 50, 60 years ago, maybe they used the term differently. The Hebrew term used in Kapach for the English accent is mikre, which means chance. I'd rather say, in other words, something that it just happens to have. If I say this table is brown, right, it happens to be brown. It could have been red, it could have been green, it could have been yellow, whatever decide in the factory they decided to paint it, right? Once you give an attribute to God, the whole thing becomes a mess, right? And you can imagine how that goes. If, however, the attribute were the essence of the thing of which is predicated, but if you're going to tell me, I remember Rambam in the last chapter said that some people will say that God has attributes, but the attributes and God are the same. Kind of like saying the table is a brown table. It's all one and the same. So Rambam says, well, no, if that doesn't make sense, why? because that would either be a tautology. A tautology means if you say, how do you know this is a table? And then the person looks at it, because it's a table, right? That's a tautology. It's redundancy. You're just saying the same thing. That's why if you look up in Webster's dictionary, you can't use the word itself when you're describing the definition of a word itself, right? Because it's a tautology. You just go on and on and on, round and round and round. It's a logical fallacy. So as if you were saying a man is a man. Well, so what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. So if the attribute is God, if you're saying that God has an attribute and that is God himself, then that's a tautology that makes sense. Or it might be worse than, or it might be something else. Or the attribute would be a mere explanation of a term. So let's say you said that there's a table, right? And then you explain, well, I'll use Rambam's own example. Why give my own table? So for example, if you said a man is a rational living being, right? What is a man? A man is a rational living being. In Rambam's mind, that's what makes a man as opposed to an animal, right? If you want to describe a giraffe or a hippopotamus, you describe their characteristics, right? But if you want to describe the difference between a man and an animal, you'll say a man is an animal, because basically we're basically an animal, but we're rational. We have the capacity for rational thought. That's what makes us a man as opposed to an animal, right? So for being a rational animal is the essence and true reality of man. So by saying that attribute, you're not really saying anything different. You're not saying an attribute. You're just describing what you're talking about. So for there does not exist in this case the third notion, apart from those of animal and of rational, that constitutes man, right? For man is the being of which life and rationality are predicated. So thus, those attributes merely signify an explanation of a term and nothing else. So either you're just saying the same thing over and over again, or you're just describing the same thing over and over again. But regardless, when you attribute an attribute, I would just did a tautology myself, right? To God, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work, right? It can't be, okay? So it is as if you said the thing denoted by the term man is the thing composed of life and rationality. So again, I'm going around in circles, but that's the point he's trying to make. It is then clear that, so therefore, an attribute may be only one of two things. It can't be the things I just said. So either it is the essence of the thing, in which case you're just going around in circles, right? Or it's something separate, right? And if it's, so we in this respect do not consider it impossible to, so if the attribute is the description of God's essence itself, then that's not impossible, that could be. But it is impossible to be in any other respect. It is impossible if the attribute is anything other than just another word for God, then it can't work. Or the attribute is different from the thing of which is predicated, being a notion super added to that thing. This would lead to the conclusion, if you go that route, then you'd be thinking that an attribute is a mikra, which belongs to the essence, which can't be. So I'm going to say it in just one simple sentence. The bottom line is that the fact that God has no attributes and can't be described with attributes is a primary intelligible. It's something that we should know. It should be obvious, but people, we've screwed it up, right? And why is that? Because if you're going to tell me that the attribute is God, then you're just saying the same word over and over again. So you just don't bother, get out of the room. I don't need to listen to that, right? If you're telling me that it's something separate from God, if you're telling me that it's a description of God, all right, fine, whatever. But you're still going round and round and round in circles. If you're telling me that an attribute is anything else, then it can't apply to him. Then we're not allowed to use it. It's against our religion to do that. So therefore, that's where he's up to. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to stop and see if people have comments, because we kind of got to let that sink in as we go through this mental exercise. So go ahead. I see a hand raised. I'm not sure why I'm not hearing.
So
It's me.
Yes.
When Abraham argues with God,
Wait,
Sodom and Gomorrah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we had two people speaking at the same
go ahead.
time.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, Jeff, you can go ahead. Finish.
Okay, when Abraham's arguing with God, are you just? Is that what Maimonides says? You can't put an attribute to God. That argument is because the question of whether God is just is an important quality that is put on. Why are we? So what's wrong with that?
So so the basic idea, and this is going to come up in a lot of different ways, is and this is the exercise that we're going through, is the idea that we experience God as just, right? but to describe God and give that to him as an attribute. See, justice is one of the 13 attributes. So so I want to
Okay, I'll withdraw the question.
yeah, you can withdraw your question, because that's the mental exercise we're going to be going through, right? Is how we can approach. Well, he's going to prove to us that God has. We can't use attributes to describe God's essence, but we can use attributes to describe how we experience it and how God relates to the world. That's a very, very brief summary of something we're going to be spending a couple of weeks on. But we have to go through this process. But it's a good question, but hold it. No, Bobby, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine. So, there were several things that I wanted to discuss, but we can hold off. If it makes sense to wait. But one though, it was pretty simple. That jumped out was, in the beginning, we or at least Adam, we've got to assume we look pretty similar to Adam, right? Was made in God's image or in the image of the heavenly entities that were there present during that conversation, at least, however you want to look at it, or whatever your belief about that is. I'm not trying to get into that, but we were made in the image of God, basically. And so that's one thing that, when you talk about the essence of man, more importantly than the few things that separate us between a chimpanzee is the fact that the chimpanzee wasn't made, or at least we don't have scripture that says the chimp was made in the image of God. So, I don't know how important that is in the conversation about trying to because that's not necessarily putting a certain description on God. It's kind of a reverse way of looking at whether or not there is any type, if it's just a blank vapor type situation, or if there is any actual physical form that can take place, or if it did, what it would look like.
So that's good. That's a good point, because we did study this together, but that Rambam actually does explain that image of God idea as referring to our intelligence, our ability to make decisions, and so he says that the image is not a physical image, but we're in the image of God in the sense that we have an independence to make decisions and understand and have an intellectual capacity.
Yeah, I understand.
Because as a physical thing, we really are chimpanzees without fur, but what makes us different is our capacity and ability to have that. And that's what Rambam did say, that's what it meant by being in the image of God.
Right. But so I guess it's just what the only thing that I would struggle with is trying to, by saying that God isn't any one thing ever at any point, it kind of limits or puts a limitation on what you believe God would be capable of. Whether God could present himself as a whirlwind or a flame in a bush, or or if that's just something that he created without ever making any representation of himself, and then how that would be interpreted by the one who saw it, or the vision, or if it was a vision or an actual real thing. I know we studied all this also.
Yeah, well, this is, you're bringing up a really good point, because, and thanks for bringing it up, because the idea that by going through this process of negative attributes, which is saying God is not this and God is not this and God is not that, on the one hand, it feels like we're limiting him, right? We're saying, oh, he's not this, he's not that. So he becomes less and less and less and less and less. But the experience that Rambam is going to bring us through is he's going to say he's not this, he's not this, he's not that, because those things, no matter how great they are, they're still human things that we're thinking about, right? They're still, when we talk about his might, well, people could be strong. We talk about his, and then as we get more, we negate all of these human characteristics, what we end up with is something that we can't understand or conceive of, but it's not because it's so minimal, but because it's so great that it's so beyond our capacity to understand. And I'm glad you said that, because
that's a wonderful way of putting it. And that's where I want to be. That's what feels right, is that it's incomprehensible. And
it's
incomprehensible. That we weren't designed to understand fully.
Right. And to the extent that the Torah uses adjectives that describe God in powerful, mighty ways, Rambam explained that the Torah doesn't choose to describe him in minimalistic ways. It doesn't attribute to him things that make him sound weak, because it wants to impress us. But that's just the very, very surface level. Beyond that surface level, we're supposed to look past that and say, when it said that God has an outstretched arm, doesn't mean he's so great because his arm can reach across, several hundred miles, and our arms only reach, 3 feet, right? It means that God is so great that that the concept of reaching is beyond him. It's something different entirely. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know that I have time to even finish this chapter. I think we're going to have to continue this next week. So I'm up to the paragraph now by denying. It's actually not a bad stopping point, because he's going to get more intensely in some more medieval philosophical stuff, and it's going to be fun. And we're going to, when we finish the next few chapters, you're going to have a really good idea of what the idea of negative attributes is. Any questions or comments anymore before we close up?
So we do have in the Siddur
Mhm.
expressions of God, Adon Hashem, Hashem, El Rachum, V'chanun. All these
Yes.
are positive statements, aren't they?
Absolutely.
What did Rambam think of?
So that's a really good question. Those are the 13 attributes of mercy, right? Hashem, Hashem, Kel Racham V'chanun. Those are the 13 attributes I was referring to, right?
Yeah.
And those why we describe God with those attributes of being all, merciful and kind and compassionate and so on, are how that fits into Rambam just telling us that we can't give God attributes. It's a great question, but Rambam is going to deal with that head on, and it's going to all fall together. I promise.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, those are he's specifically choosing the term attributes because he wants to aim at that. That's the heart of Jewish liturgy is the 13 attributes of mercy, right? So so Rambam is very aware of that, and it's going to be a basic building block of this entire building he's going to build for us.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. What else? Anything else? Okay. All right. So Bli Neder, we'll be here same time next week. Thank you for coming. And it was a wonderful day. Thank you.
יישר כוח.
All right.